I always knew that Canada was a place where people could express themselves however they wanted to. It's a place where everybody got accepted. You start believing that you could do anything, and you start believing that things are possible and the future is bright for you. And to any refugee in the world, I would like to tell them that
Welcome to another episode of the Canadian Dream Podcast. We are here in our studio in Vancouver, and I'm sitting in front of someone who came to Canada as a refugee about 3 years ago, Muhaddisa.
hello.
You got recommended because you were actually giving a talk at TED Talk in Surrey. What did you talk about?
I did my TED Talk, and it was basically about my life as a refugee, mainly about how it was like living in Indonesia and my journey to Canada with my family and getting used to life in Canada as a teenager and in high school and things like that.
Great. So let's talk about all of that. And let's start from the beginning. You were born in Iran.
Yes. I was born in Iran, but my family are originally Hazaras from Afghanistan. And so we immigrated to Iran right a few years before I was born. And me and my younger brother were born and raised there. And we lived there for a little bit. Hazara people, they cover a big part of the population, but we have been historically oppressed. And there is a Hazara genocide that is going on against my people. And because of that, we have been targeted and subjected to a lot of genocide and a lot of oppression and discrimination. And because of that, it was very difficult to live there. And even if you weren't a Hazara, it's difficult to live in Afghanistan because it's not very safe. And because of that, my family moved out of Afghanistan quite a few years ago.
And what is it that makes this specific group be prosecuted by other people?
Well, starting off even with physically, we look very different. We have more East Asian features, well as most of people from Afghanistan, they look very different from as compared to Hazara people. Hazara people look more East Asian, like we have smaller eyes or more round nose. So even from the physical appearance, you can tell a Hazara person apart. And not only that, but we are also subjected because of our religious beliefs. Because even though most of Afghanistan are Muslim people, there are two different sects of Islam. And because of that, since Hazara people are majority Shia Muslims as compared to Sunni Muslims, because of that, there's a big difference as well.
How did your parents move from Indonesia first, from Iran? What happened that made them decide to leave Iran for good?
For the majority of my life, we were never really stable in a single place. So my family kept moving around for a while. Like at first it was Afghanistan, and then we moved to Iran, and then we went to Pakistan for a little bit. And so in most of these countries, we could lead a temporary life. And it was difficult because, especially me and my siblings growing up, we were kids and we had to get accustomed to one culture in one place, and we had to move on to the next, because it never really felt like it was a permanent home. And there were a lot of complications with my family. Because of that, we had to keep moving. And so moving to Indonesia, we came from Pakistan actually. And we knew that if we moved to Indonesia through the UN, there was a way in which we could find a permanent home.
And how long were you in Indonesia for?
For 5 years.
5 years.
Yeah. And so most of the refugees that do move to Indonesia, they're under the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And so the only reason that you live in Indonesia is to wait temporarily, indefinitely, until your case gets processed and you can move to another place. So I was there for 5 years waiting to find another home for me and my family.
And that's when you got the chance to come to Canada?
Yes.
Okay. Before you moved to Canada, I want to know about your childhood memories. Tell me some of your best childhood memories.
Even though I spent 5 years in Indonesia, the majority of my memories are from there because it was a very important time of my life. I was there from when I was about 11 to 15 years old. So it was a huge and very significant part of my life. So a lot of my memories are from there. And although Indonesia was definitely not a temporary home and there was a lot of difficulties living there, most of the difficulties were especially because of all the uncertainty and the stress from not knowing where to go, because we were stuck in a place where we had no idea what the future contained, but at the same time, we could not go back. So it was sort of being stuck in a place where you're very uncertain and you're very worried for your future, especially because as refugees in Indonesia, we had no rights to have an education or be employed or have a job. And because of that, especially for a lot of the parents with young children as young as 5 or 7 years old, you don't know what to do to help your kids because they were not able to go to public school. They were not able to get a proper formal education. And so there were a lot of these factors that played into my life. And I think that although these difficulties were setbacks for me, there were also motivations for me. And one of my most important memories come from my school. So since we weren't allowed to go to school, the refugee community actually came together to make like a informal refugee school that was run by refugees, and it was for refugees. And so all the teachers were volunteers and kids from all ages could go to school. And we had like 4 subjects, and it was about like 4 hours per day. And so this school was a very, very significant part of my life because I knew that I was not formally allowed to go to school or have these basic human rights, but this school was a place where I had this sort of very tight community with other refugee kids like myself and other Afghan kids like myself who I could relate to. There were people that were in the exact same boat as me and understood me and were there for me. And so that was a very, very important part of my life. And I was so lucky to have that support system and to be surrounded by people who I could connect with deeply. And I think one of my favorite memories was how once a week we were able to have this sports day where for one period we could go into the yard and play any game that we wanted. And so it was very fun because all our classmates would argue about, oh, we should play volleyball. No, we should play like dodgeball and these sort of games. And so it was like the highlight of our entire week. I mean, we would just be counting down the minutes until we could go to the yard and play some games. And it was a really fun time. I think most of the times we played this game in Farsi, we call it wasati. And it's kind of similar to dodgeball, where you have 2 teams on each side and you have a team in the middle and you hit each other with the ball and whoever gets hit gets to go out. And I think those were one of my favorite memories, getting to just be kids and play in the yard. And it was special because even though you knew that you weren't at an actual school and you didn't have the same opportunities as other kids in the world, it was a very intimate moment where we all got to just have fun with our teachers, with our classmates. And that's definitely one of my most fond memories from Indonesia.
Was that all on a refugee camp?
No, there were people who were in refugee camps in Indonesia, but for me personally, I was on a refugee camp, and there were a big population of people who just lived in little towns and cities.
And did you have a best friend? You were also close with your sister, you said?
Yes, I was, and my younger brother as well.
Okay, so you have 2 siblings.
I have 4 siblings.
Oh, 4?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have 1 older sister, I have 2 older brothers, and 1 younger brother.
Did you have any best friends growing up that you had to say goodbye to?
Yeah, for sure. Like I mentioned before, I was able to grow very, very close to a couple of people in Indonesia. And specifically, I had this friend group of girls. We were about 5 or 6 girls. And we were very close. We were all in the same class, most of us. And we'd also just hang out, go to each other's houses outside of school. And I grew very, very close to them. And what was most special was for majority of them, I knew them from the very beginning, from the very first time I came to Indonesia. And I think the biggest thing that bonded all of us was the school. And especially for 2 of my friends, we were in the same class. And so the system is very different from Canada, where in Canada you have different classes with different people. But in this system that we had, we were all the same people in the same class each year. So we would all go to like the higher grade together. And so that's why everyone got to be so close. And I had this friend group of a few friends who were very, very close to me. They were like sisters to me. And so one of the most difficult parts about leaving Indonesia was saying goodbye to them. And we had very fond memories together. And like I mentioned, we were all in the same boat. We all understood each other. And it's bittersweet because when someone leaves Indonesia, you're so truly happy for them. And you're so happy that they finally get to leave and follow their dreams and start their new life. But at the same time, you feel sad that you got to grow so close with this person and suddenly they're not in your life anymore.
And what dreams did you and your family have when you were growing up as a child first and then as a teenager until you had the chance to come to Canada?
I think one of the biggest dreams, not only for my family, but for a lot of Hazara families, is education and being able to follow your career goals and follow your academic goals. Because even within Afghanistan, Hazara people have always been very talented people who are so passionate about their education. Almost every Hazara family that I know always encourages their children to do well in school, to always pay attention to their futures, and to be a role model not only for Hazara people but also for their families. And I think even as a child in Iran, since we were refugees in Iran as well, we were also not allowed to formally go to school. And because of that, we weren't allowed to go to public school. And although I was younger at the time, my older siblings were in elementary school at the time. It was very, very difficult for them and my parents because they weren't able to go to school properly. And because of that, they had to go to these schools that were made by other Hazara people. Even from the time that I was very young, education was a huge part of my life. And I could see how important it was to not only my older siblings, but also to my parents. And I feel like that dream also carried on to go on to my adolescent years when I reached Indonesia, where again, we were struck by the same problem, the same barrier of not being able to fulfill our dreams and educate ourselves and seek knowledge, basically. And I think that has been one of my biggest goals. I mean, every refugee friend that I had in Indonesia would always dream about going to a school. I mean, it sounds ridiculous when I say it to my Canadian friends now because everyone's always so sick of school and it's like tiring or boring for them. But especially for me and my friends back in Indonesia, school was the biggest thing. I mean, we'd watch these movies about these American high schools and all these classes that we go to, and I couldn't even imagine it. And it was one of my biggest goals to actually be able to go to a real school with teachers and these subjects that you could just pick and do whatever you wanted to, study whatever you wanted to do. And I feel like that's just always been a lifelong dream of mine. And I'm incredibly humbled and grateful that I get to be in a situation where I can study whatever I want. I get to seek the knowledge that I wish, and I get to educate myself and seek so much knowledge that is so abundant. And so that was definitely one of the dreams that has always been in my life and that I've always felt like I've chased since a young age.
How about your parents? They probably dreamed of other things as well. Were they actually working in Indonesia?
No. In Indonesia, we're actually not allowed to work or study. So there was no employment, but at the same time, there was no formal education. And I think for my parents as well, their goal has always been to protect their children, especially when you are the parent of children who are living in an unstable country with unstable conditions. Your goal is to get them to a place where they can not only be safe, but get to experience their childhood and be children and go to school and things like that. And my mom is someone who is very, very special to me. She's one of the strongest people that I know. And her entire life, she has encouraged me and my siblings to follow our dreams, to be a role model for other people, and to always step out of our comfort zones. And I think especially every single parent who is a refugee and has refugee children, their biggest goal is to get their children to somewhere where they can be safe and secure. And there's so much trauma and so much stress and worries that it comes when it comes to not knowing what the future holds for your children and for you. And all parents want to provide for their children. All parents want to make their children feel safe. And when you're not able to have that, when you're not able to control what situations your kids are living in, I think it's extremely stressful. And I think for my parents, one of their biggest goals has been to get their kids to have an education and for their kids to lead the life that they want to.
Bring me back to the moment when 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, when you found out for the first time that you could come to Canada.
In Indonesia, it's like one of the biggest things ever. And in Indonesia, for some reason, everyone has a very small phone that is dedicated to the UN office where they call you. So that is that one phone that basically symbolizes hope for everyone else. And that's one small phone. Ours was a Nokia phone, and it has like the buttons and everything. It's a small screen. It's only designated for getting the call. And it was 3 years ago. It was the end of 2019 when my family finally got the call that we got our airplane tickets to come to Canada. And it was one of the biggest moments of my entire life because it is that single call that you just anticipate the entire time that you're living in Indonesia. It's that single call that you're always waiting for. And it just causes you so much stress. You're like, when are they going to call you? Because you never know. With the whole case processing in Indonesia, you don't know which country you're going to. You don't know when you're going, and you don't know. You basically have no control. But no matter what, I was just excited. I didn't really think about what country I'm going to do. All I wanted to do was to finally be able to call a place home.
And so go to school.
Yeah, for sure. And when I finally got that call, it was a very, very special time for me and my family because it's not only a special call for you, but to get to share that news with the rest of the community, and everyone's so happy for you. And you have this period of time where you go to people's houses and you say goodbye. And it was a very special time. And I remember vividly when my brother finally got the call, and we were so excited because at that one, is that like 5-minute call that basically changes your entire life. And you start thinking, oh my God, I need to start packing and start leaving. What are we going to do next? And getting that call, I remember very vividly. It was the end of 2019, and it was one of the most important moments of my life. It was very special.
And how did you picture Canada?
I pictured Canada very similar to what it is now. I always knew that Canada was a place where people could express themselves however they wanted to. It's a place where everybody got accepted. And especially with my background of being Hazara, I've always been in an environment where I had to feel ashamed or somehow embarrassed or try to hide my identity and who I was. And because of that, I was very excited to go to a place where I could finally express not only my cultural identity, but just myself as who I was, and not be afraid of how I'm going to be perceived, not be afraid of how people are going to treat me based on what I look like or the place that I come from. And I always pictured Canada as this amazing place where I got to be who I wanted to be, and most importantly, go to school and chase my goals and finally live in a place where I felt comfortable, where I felt safe, and where I knew that my future was safe.
Did you all come to Vancouver first?
Yes, the very first place we came to was Vancouver.
And that's where you all decided to stay?
Yes.
Yeah. So what are your parents doing now?
It's just my mom now, and she actually learning English now. So every night she goes to school, she goes to the English classes, and she works really hard because she's older now, and it's a bit harder for you to start learning new languages, especially when when you're sitting in an English class trying to learn English. And she's been studying for quite a few years now, and I'm very proud of her. She's coming along very well, and also she gets a lot of help from me and my siblings to teach her English. And yeah, my mom is learning English right now. She's trying her best to learn more about the Canadian culture and community.
So you live with your mom and your 4 siblings?
Yes.
What happened to your dad?
My dad passed away a couple years ago before we came to Indonesia.
Oh, he didn't have the chance to
No, he didn't.
live the Canadian dream.
No, it was always his lifelong dream, and that was the dream that he always encouraged me and my siblings to follow. And I think it's very special that we are able to live here now, and we're safe, and especially me, I get to follow my dreams, and I get to make him proud.
Yeah. What is the most important thing for you right now? It was education before you came here, and at this stage of your life, you're 18, grade 12.
I think for me right now, the most important thing is trying to create an impact, because especially with my background, being a Hazara, being a refugee, I've always been on the end where I faced a lack of opportunities, faced a lack of resources, a lack of representation, and I was in a place where I had to have somebody advocate for me. I had to have somebody that could speak for me, because I didn't have that kind of voice. I didn't get to have that luxury to be able to represent myself and to be able to help others, because I was in such a dire situation myself. So I feel like now that I'm in a very fortunate place where I get to have a voice, where I am given a platform, and I'm able to talk about my story, where I come from, the friends that I've left behind, the people that are still stuck in those difficult situations. The most important thing for me right now is to advocate for people, advocate for refugees and for Hazara people, and to spread awareness, because it was one of the most important and shocking things for me when I first came to Canada was how little people knew about refugees and the lives that they live, and Hazara people and the persecution of Hazara people. And so one of the most important goals for me right now is to able to create an impact and be that voice for people that I know are trying so hard to be seen, are trying so hard to live the life that they want to lead, but they're unable to. And that's just one of the things that are so important to me right now. And I hope that in the future as well, I get to be in a place where I can advocate for such people, and I can be in a place where my voice can have an impact on others, and I can create awareness.
And when you came to Canada, you thought all your problems would be solved. What were the main challenges that you actually faced after you came to Canada? Not only you, but also your siblings. Who had it the worst?
I think one of the biggest challenges of moving to Canada, for me personally, especially in high school, is that sort of feeling of isolation or feeling that I'm different from everybody else because I am. And so getting used to the fact that I didn't grow up in this education system. I didn't grow up in a system where I was used to this Canadian lifestyle and culture. And especially with a lot of people in my school, their parents play such a huge role in their education. You know, they plan their courses. They have these people that can guide them to university, that can guide them into a career path. And they have that sort of mentorship and guidance from their parents or other adults in their lives. And for me, that was very difficult because I didn't have that sort of guidance. My older siblings are busy trying to open the path for their own lives. My mom never finished high school. She never graduated, and she isn't able to give me that guidance that I need. And I think one of the biggest challenges for moving to Canada is sort of creating that balance where you're trying to hold on to your own identity, but at the same time, you're trying to integrate and you're trying to join into this Canadian community. And so it was very difficult for me to be able to get used to the fact that I don't have some of the luxuries and privileges that a lot of Canadian friends have. And especially for a lot of my siblings, me and my younger brother are very lucky that we were able to get to Canada at a very young age, where we were able to go through high school, university, and the entire standard process. But for my older siblings, where they get to suddenly be put into this life where they're adults and everybody in Canada expects them to live and study and work like adults, but their lives have been so interrupted and they've been so disrupted and never on the same clear path as everybody else. Like, it was never just elementary school, high school, university, and getting a job. And so I think that it's especially difficult for adults who just move into a country where they're so unfamiliar with everything else, but the rest of the world expects them to just catch up and to just start living like everybody else. So I think that one of the biggest difficulties is just the culture shock and trying to get used to life and trying to catch up to everybody else who's been so ahead of you. And you're a step behind everybody else while you're trying to maintain that life and maintain your goals.
Tell me maybe one or two episodes, bad days that you had right after you came to Canada.
One of the difficulties or one of the bad memories would be very related to what I mentioned before, but coming to the realization that I would never be able to lead that sort of standard or quote unquote normal life as everybody else. It always felt like I would have to be one step ahead of everyone else or work harder than everybody else to reach the same level or maintain the same level. And so it's a difficult pill to swallow to know that you're the same age as everybody else. You're just a teenage girl like everybody else. But there's always a barrier that's separating you from other Canadian students and other Canadian teenagers. There will always be a barrier that just reminds you that life will never be as easy for you and that you will have to work harder. You'll have to reach out. You'll have to work extra hard for things that are just handed to people. And so I think that although that can always be something that is a step back from me, it also acts as motivation. It also acts as something that inspires me and reminds me to work harder. And it's something that it is never something that takes away my motivation. It's not something that just makes me hopeless. In fact, I would say it's the opposite. It's knowing that even though I'm very different, even though that I've come from a very different place, there's something in me that also connects me to everyone here. There's something in me that is similar, and I'm as ambitious. I have big dreams, and in the same way, I'm like everybody else, even though I may be so different.
I would like to know if there's maybe one or two examples that you can give of the hardships that you faced, like concrete examples. Like one day I remember.
I think one of the most solid examples was when I was around in grade 10 or 11, and I was trying to think about my career path and what I wanted to do for university. And I kept asking around for my friends and what they wanted to do and what their plans were. And they seemed so certain in what they wanted to do because either their parents had gone the same career path or they had already, since like grade 9, they'd already planned up their courses and everything else to line up with university requirements. But at that time, I felt so lost and misguided. And so because of that, I was constantly emailing and messaging my school counselor and my teachers and always reaching out to these people. And it was difficult for them because they didn't know much about me and where I come from, and it was so different. But I think that's one of the examples that tells me, because I always have to be the one reaching out and I always have to ask people things, even though it may not come as easy. It's also the misconceptions that people may have about me. And I spoke about this on my TED Talk, but it was an example of when I first came to Canada and I was having a conversation with a group of people that I just met. And one of the girls mentioned being an immigrant, and they were all Canadian born. And one of the other girls started taking that as sort of an insult and saying that she wasn't an immigrant and that why would she call her that, and she's born in Canada. And so for me, being not only a recent immigrant but a refugee, sitting in that circle and hearing them talk about immigration so negatively, it left an impact on me, and it definitely gave me something to think about, to see that these people also come from immigrants. Their parents, their grandparents, the people that come from are also immigrants who are new to this country. But why is it that they see it as such a negative thing? Why is it that it is seen as an insult? Whereas immigration, being an immigrant, is supposed to represent strength, is supposed to represent bravery. And so that was one of the moments that I really got to sit down and think about the way people viewed me and a lot of misconceptions a lot of people have. I mean, why is it that these people are viewing me and other immigrants in this way when there's nothing to prove that immigrants were ever anything negative or ever people that were different from everybody else?
Did you talk a lot with your siblings and your mom about all the hardships you were facing?
That's a tricky question because especially as someone who was brought into this life where it's expected that you face difficulties, especially when trying to fit in or blending into a society. It's a weird balance because I am very close to my family and I'm always speaking to them and sharing to them about my life. But at the same time, I always felt this sort of guilt that I didn't want to put that pressure on them or give them the extra stress or worry. And I always try to sort of tell them, oh, I'm doing well in school, everything's doing fine. And so, yeah, I try to find a balance between not feeling guilty to, put that sort of pressure on them and to make them feel worried about me or how my school life is going. And I've always been brought up to be independent and to deal with my problems in my own way, but to know that my family always has my back.
How was your first year at school here?
Well, it was very difficult because the very first time I went to school was in January of 2020, and it was second semester of grade 9. And so what I expected was, I thought that when I just go to school, the teacher will introduce me and everyone will know that I'm a new student and that I get to make friends that way. But since I joined in the middle of the semester, I just walked into my first class and my teacher didn't know me, the students didn't know me. And it was very difficult because to everybody else, I looked like I was just another student. I just joined the school. Some people didn't even know I was new. And so I didn't really have a way for people to know that, hey, I am new. Hey, I may need help sometimes. I don't know anyone. And so I just dropped into a class and nothing happened. And so it was difficult because I never got to introduce myself to anybody, and I just had to slowly just make my way into finding my own friends and getting to know my own teachers. And so, yeah, I do very vividly remember the first day of school, and it was very special because it was a big school and it was literally like the school of my dreams, even though it's just a regular public school. And I couldn't believe that there's a whole gym, there's cooking classes, there's music classes, and there's always these things that you only see in movies. And when you see in real life, it seems so surreal. But at the same time, everybody else around you just treats it like normal, and it feels like you're the only one that's freaking out. So it was very cool to see, and I was very excited on my first day. And I got to make friends and people, and I get to tell everyone that I was new and who I was, and it was really fun.
What's the hardest subject for you?
I think the hardest subject for me would probably be math, even though that's ironic because you would expect to have difficulties maybe in the language or English or other stuff that may be different from other countries. But a lot of people say that they like math because it's like a universal language, right? It's the same in every country or every language. But I think I really don't like math. I'm very interested in English or social sciences and things like that, but I'm not a big fan of math, and that's one of the things that I struggle the most in.
Who are normally your friends now in Canada?
I have a very close group of friends, and we're all girls. We're about 4 to 5 girls, and we hang out every day in school and out of school. And I find that although it's very easy in Canada to make friends with everybody, everybody's so friendly and welcoming and understanding, I feel like there's always something that connects you to other people who are in some way in the same situation as you. And I find myself becoming a lot more closer to people who are also immigrants or recent immigrants or people who are not born in Canada. And one of my best friends in Canada actually is someone who is also an immigrant, and we're able to relate on so many other things. And actually, one of my best friends is someone who recently came to Canada, and we were very close friends in Indonesia as well. So I was able to move to Vancouver 3 years ago, and she moved to Vancouver about a year ago. And we were sort of able to rekindle our friendship from that way on. There's always a part of me that feels much more connected to people that can relate to me, people that know my struggles or are familiar with it. And so I find myself becoming close friends with other people who are also immigrants or refugees.
And how important is religion for you and for your siblings and for your mom?
I think not only for my family personally, but religion is a very big part of my country as well and the culture that I come from, because it's in sort of ways religion just shifts into a lot of different factors into your life. And in some ways, it even becomes a sort of culture for some other people rather than religion itself. And for my family personally, and for me personally, religion was very important because especially when I lived in Indonesia, being in a sort of situation where you feel hopeless or you feel like there is no way forward, I feel like religion is something that not only unites people and brings them together, but also is something that acts as a beacon of hope, as a reason to continue living, as a reason of motivation for a lot of people, and especially for myself.
And do you practice any sports, or are there any activities that you do outside of school?
Yeah. So when I was in Indonesia, I did taekwondo and I did futsal, which is like a smaller version of football, and it was very, very fun. And that was also one of the bigger things that was super exciting for like the people in my school, the refugee school, because we would do futsal. We had a futsal team from our school. There was a boys team and a girls team, and we'd have practices outside of school. And it was a huge part of my life in Indonesia, and I was very passionate for it. And then when I moved to Canada, it was a bit difficult because I was so preoccupied with school and catching up with my academics and everything that I didn't really get to join a sports team. But outside of that, I am an outdoorsy person, and for fun, me and my family go to a lot of parks and lakes. And BC itself is so big that you're always discovering more parks and places to go, no matter how long you've lived here. And so that's one of the things that bonds me and my family a lot. Usually on the weekends or on special occasions, we just get on like a short road trip and we go to different lakes, different beaches. And I do love being outdoors.
So do I. 2 weeks ago, in fact, the guy who was there behind the camera,
Right.
Another guy from Brazil who actually plays futsal.
Really?
And myself, we were on a road trip across northern BC.
Oh, wow.
And we saw within 2 hours, we saw 4 bears and 1 wolf.
Really?
Yeah, driving.
Just driving, or did you all guys also?
Driving between Prince George
Right.
and Valemount.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so nice. I've seen lots of bears.
Yeah. How long were you on the road?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yeah. What has changed in your personality and in the way you see the world since you came to Canada 3 years ago?
I think that's a very, very good question, because there have been a lot of changes to my personality. And even though I feel like at the core I'm still the same person, there's obviously ways, because my environment has changed so much, in the same ways I have changed in the ways to see how people perceive me, how I perceive the world, how I want to continue with my future. And I think one of the biggest things is that I've become a lot more ambitious and a lot more passionate, because especially when I lived in Indonesia, there was a lot of situations where I felt hopeless because the future was so uncertain. The life that I was living in was very stressful and uncertain. And so it was very difficult to find motivation. But then when I moved to Canada, and I was suddenly so lucky and privileged to be in a situation where I had so many opportunities around me. I had so many opportunities for self-improvement, so many avenues that I could explore, and even things that I wanted to do for fun. There were so many things that I could do. That was one of the things that definitely made me a lot more passionate. It definitely made me work a lot more harder for what I wanted to do, because when you actually are put in a situation and you start believing that you could do anything and you start believing that things are possible and the future is bright for you, that just changes something in you, and that just changes the way you view the world and how ambitious you become. Because when you're just stuck in darkness and you have no idea what's in front of you, it's difficult to want to move forward. It's difficult to feel motivated. But then when I first moved to Canada and I realized how lucky I was to be in a place where I had so many opportunities in front of me, so many doors I could unlock, it made me a lot more passionate about the things I do. And when I finally got to experience living in Canada and I realized the life that I used to live in Indonesia was so different and so much more difficult. And to think that to this day, I have friends who are living in Indonesia in the same conditions, and they don't get to experience the same rights as me. They don't get to experience the same luxuries that I get to experience in Canada. That is one of the things that makes me so much more motivated to advocate for those friends, so much more motivated to be able to follow my passions and to do the things that younger me would have just dreamed about. The younger me would have never even thought would be possible.
I can totally relate to that. Isn't it funny that immigrants like us come to Canada with all this energy and all these dreams, and we see all these opportunities, and then we are surrounded by people who grew up here, who think, oh, life is so hopeless.
For sure.
Oh, sure. I need more help from the government.
Exactly.
Right? I need this and this and this and this. And we're going, oh, no, you can go and grab it all.
Exactly. That's one of the biggest things when I first moved to Canada and I realized all these Canadian teenagers were like, oh, I want to move out of Canada. It's so boring here. There's nothing to do. And my mind was blown because I'm like, I've spent like 5 years of my life trying to get here. And it's like basically the place of dreams, basically. And I'm like doing everything I can to explore what I can do. And then there's people that are just so ungrateful. And because they're so unaware of what is going on outside of Canada and they're not told about it. They're not aware of people that are living in situations that are so much more worse, people that would have dreamed to be in their position. And so I think that's one of the things that is so important is that education in awareness and education in advocating for people and to put yourself in the shoes of someone else. I feel like that's important because that it takes you a minute to sit down and reflect about the life that you have, what you're surrounded by, and what other people are surrounded by. Because I feel like it's so easy to fall into this trap where you think about people that are richer than you, people that are more famous than you, more successful than you, and want to wish for that life. But it should be just as easy for you to sit down and think about people who have much less than you, for people who have a lot more difficult lives than you do. And I feel like that's one of the things that makes you much more present in your life, and one of the things that really teaches you a lot about where you are, where you want to go, and what kind of person you want to become.
What piece of advice would you give to Canadian-born young students who are, teenagers or about your age or in their early 20s? What would you tell them in order to have a more fulfilled life?
One of the things that I would tell them is to start educating themselves on what is going on around the world, because we're living in such a progressive world where everything is changing constantly. Things are never the same, not only politically, but socially, culturally, technologically. And so it's very, very easy to start living in this echo chamber where you're only surrounded by people who are just like you, by ideas who are just like similar to yours. And so one of my biggest advice would be in order to have that perspective, in order to live a life that's fulfilling, in order to live a life where you're so much more aware of not only yourself, but about the world, is to just educate yourself, just to start thinking about what your friends are living like. If you meet an immigrant or a refugee, ask them what their life was like. What did they do? How did they grow up? And I feel like that just sort of gives you this perspective that allows you to lead your life in a more meaningful way, knowing that you are living a life while also being aware of what other people are doing or how other people are living. And so not only that, but just something just as simple as gratitude can go a long way. Because I feel a lot of times when you feel hopeless, a lot of times when you feel unmotivated, just taking that second to sit down and think about how lucky you are, the things you have, the people that you're surrounded by is very, very important. And I feel like that is just one of the small things that can give you hope and more motivation to keep going forward. Is to just be grateful for what you have and to practice that sort of gratitude where you are much more aware of where you are, where you want to go, where you have been, and the person that you were and are trying to become.
Great. And what piece of advice would you give to other refugees like you or younger than you?
One of the most important pieces of advice that I would give to any refugee is to always have hope and to do what you can in the situation that you are in, and to do your best to hold on to that sort of drive and hold on to the hope that you have. Because I feel like, especially being a refugee, it's so difficult to have hope for the future and so difficult to try to predict what's going to happen in the future. And so do your best to improve yourself, do your best to discover more about your passions and who you are with the situations that you are in, and to know that you are not alone and you never will be alone. And there will always be a place in the world for you, and there always is people that are trying to help you, people that are trying to support you. And to any refugee in the world, I would like to tell them to stay strong, to keep doing what you're doing, and to always stay hopeful for the future, because there will always be a place for you in the world.
And finally, what would you like to say to someone who is coming to Canada and wants to be as prepared as possible?
To try to find a community of yourself, surround yourself by people who support you and by people that you can depend on and people that can be there for you and have your back, whether that be family, whether that be friends, whether that be people in your workplace or community or school. Because I think that one of the biggest differences that I noticed when I first came to Canada socially is this culture of individualism and how people are sort of isolated from each other, not only from their families, but just as friends. And that's one of the biggest differences that I noticed, because in my culture, in Hazara culture or in Afghanistan, people are very, very close-knit. People are very family-oriented. They do a lot of sacrifices for the family. They work very hard to give their families a comfortable life. And not only this, but even between neighbors, friends, classmates, it's just a very close-knit community where you know that you're surrounded by people that in your darkest times were there for you, in your happiest times will be there for you. And so when you come to Canada, you can sort of feel isolating in that way, because you're put into this social environment where people are much more different. You know, everyone's leading their own personal lives. Everyone wants to achieve their personal goals. And it's just sort of isolated and more individualistic in that way. One of the biggest advice that I would give is to try to find that community that will help you not feel that isolation, that will help you, that help to bring you up and support you and give you that support that is very needed when you're working in such, fast forward in a world that's so progressive and fast forward, like especially like Vancouver. It's a very big city, it's a very busy city, and so I think it's very easy to feel like you're falling short or feel like you're feeling lost. And so because of that, it's always very important to surround yourself with very good people that are there for you, they'll have your back, and on who you can depend on.
Awesome. Now tell me, what is your next big dream that you are working on?
One of my biggest dreams have been to go to law school and become a lawyer, specializing in human rights law. And I actually realized this when I first came to Canada in grade 11, and I just randomly chose this social studies course, which was Law 12. And before that, I had never even considered law. I had never even known what it was like. And so I went into this law class and I enjoyed it so much, especially my teacher, Miss Rakar. She's an amazing teacher and she was so passionate about what she does. And so I instantly fell in love with social sciences. I fell in love with law and I found it so interesting. And what was the best thing was that I found this interest and this passion that I was so dedicated to, but at the same time I could connect it to my identity and my background and my past. Because even growing up in Iran and Indonesia, there was so much problems with being an immigrant and a refugee, where you had no representation legally, you had no representation when it comes to documents or your relationship with policies or the government. And so that was something that was very important for me, and to grow up knowing that my mom would just hold my hand and constantly go around chasing immigration offices, chasing places where she could find the documents or the paperwork that she needed for her family. But she was never given that representation. She was never given that opportunity or that chance to be fairly represented and to be fairly introduced to creating a safe and a secure life for her and the children. And it was very important for me. And so within law, I can connect this to my identity, and in the future, I can help other families who have been in the same shoes as mine. I can help other families who are struggling to represent themselves legally. And so that was very important for me. And that's as a goal that's pretty far-sighted right now, but that's one of my goals, to become a lawyer and to pursue law. And it's something that I'm very passionate about. And I've tried to try to include this in my life when I'm doing I'm very passionate about public speaking. So I do a lot of public speaking contests, and I try to include this when I'm doing a contest, or I have to write an essay or do a speech. I try to talk about how little representation there is legally for a lot of refugees and immigrants, and how it creates such a barrier between them into integrating into a Western world where they're not familiar with the rules, they're not familiar with what they're supposed to do. And so because of that, I'm very passionate and very fond of pursuing a career in law.
Is that what you're going to do now?
Yes, I'll be going to my bachelor's in UBC for the fall, and I'm trying to do my undergraduate studies maybe in political science. And then for grad school, a couple of years later, I'm trying to go to law school.
Are you happy now?
I would say that I'm happy now, yes. I mean, that's a subjective word, and it's constantly changing, it's shifting. But for the most part, I would say it is the happiest that I've been for the majority of my life. And I think that it's a process. And I've heard this a lot, but it's taken me a while to learn that happiness is not a journey or a destination. It's not an end point, but it's how you get to that place. Happiness is a journey that you take throughout your life, and it's not something that you should be chasing, that when I reach this age, when I land this job, I'm going to be happy. But it's just finding the small ways in which you can create happiness for yourself. And happiness can be anything from satisfaction, anything from feeling calm and relaxed, anything from knowing that you're following your dreams and creating that life for yourself. It can be happiness.
Great. I want to ask you one more thing, but before that, I want to thank everybody for sticking with us until the end of this episode. If you're watching it on YouTube, remember to like the video, to share it, and to subscribe to our channel. And I'll see you on the next episode. Now, last question. Looking at that camera over there, what would you like to say to your mom and to your dad?
I think one of the most important things I want to say to my parents is to just completely and utterly thank them for every single thing that they've done for me and my siblings, and to let them know that I want to thank them for everything that they've done. Not only that, but I want to be in a place where I can give them back the happiness and the satisfaction and the love and the security that they've given me. And I want them to know that I hope they're proud of me, and that every single day my motivation is to make my family proud, and my motivation is to know that my mom is sitting at home and is proud of who I've become, and is happy knowing that I'm chasing my dreams, and I've become a person that a younger me would be proud of.
Yeah, I am proud of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Of course, thank you so much for having me.
See you guys next time.